Hi, so I just thought I'd do a quick video regarding breastfeeding, my experiences and some of the things I found useful, some things I've not found useful. I've got 4 children, and all of my experiences with them are completely different. So I feel like I've got a lot of information that might help some people, and I feel like I've got better at it as I've had more children. So yeah, I just thought I'd share a few experiences. My sister has also found some of my experiences helpful to her and advice, and she also has given me some advice on some things that she's experienced that I haven't experienced. So I just thought I'd kind of share like overall everything on breastfeeding that I know, and it hopefully will help someone out there. So I'll start off with my eldest son. I had him when I was like 18 years old. I'll be honest, didn't really know what I'm doing, and at the age of 18 you feel like you know what you're doing and you feel like you know everything, but you really don't. And I'll admit it now, and there was things that I didn't know. Not many people in my family have breastfed, or not that I'm aware of anyway, so I didn't really have much knowledge of it. My mum couldn't breastfeed, so she didn't really have any advice in that area that she could help me with. And I didn't do any reading, which was a big mistake, I think, you know, and I think I could help myself. Also, Bradley was a very hungry baby. I'm talking every hour. And I do think that he perhaps wouldn't have benefited so much from breastfeeding anyway. I mean, every baby's different. I've got another sister who tried to breastfeed and she couldn't. You know, there's nothing wrong with not being able to breastfeed. It is what it is. And again, like I say, some babies don't want to. Like my youngest sister, her daughter didn't want to breastfeed, but she now has a son who's a week older than Macy, and he's brilliant at breastfeeding. So it's sometimes the baby's choice as well. Although obviously you can change that if you really want to. And it can be difficult in the beginning. I remember constantly being told that if it hurts, then you're doing it wrong. Now, after having 4 children, that is a complete rubbish. Complete rubbish. Okay, first of all, yeah, it may hurt if you're doing it wrong, and you know, later down the line you'll know it's because you're doing it wrong. But generally, you've never had a child breastfeeding on your nipple before, it's gonna hurt, and your body has to kind of adapt to it. So you are going to have times where it's a bit stingy and not so comfortable, and you learn to adapt. And with all 4 of my children, even though I've got better at breastfeeding and more knowledge about breastfeeding, them first couple of weeks you get sore, because like I say, your body's trying to adapt, and you get red, and that is where one product definitely does come in handy: the lanolin cream. Now you can get little samples of these in bags, and of different ones I've tried, this by far is the best one. It's the most purest, and you know, it kind of takes the edge off it. And I found that with this, if I got sore or broken skin, you know, I'd put this on straight after a feed, or even, you know, a little while before I was going to feed, and it really did make a difference, and it really did help, because by the time the next feed came around, they weren't as bad, you know. And it's just fantastic. Obviously, in the beginning of feeding, babies are like constantly on their nipple, and they have like certain days. I think it's like day 2 and day 3, they can be on your boob the whole time, and then I think it happens again at like day 6. They could spend the whole day on your boob again. Establishing it can be tricky and tiring and exhausting, but you just have to remember that it's not going to be like that always. It's just in the beginning where everything's getting, you know, your body's changing and your body's establishing stuff. So back to my first pregnancy. After a week of no sleep and every hour, you know, it just felt like he wasn't getting enough, I gave up. And I kind of regret giving up, but at the same time, I know that perhaps it just wasn't for him, and at the time it felt like, you know, right to do that. And in all honesty, when I look back at his feeding, he was still a difficult feeder on the bottle. He would wake up an awful lot anyway. So I think, you know, no matter what I'd done, he was going to be tricky in that way. But I gave up. Fast forward to Joshua, my second son. He was born in 2009, and his birth was super easy. Both Bradley and Joshua were natural births. Bradley's was ridiculously long, horrendous delivery. Joshua's was a walk in the park, super short, straightforward, textbook delivery, you know, as far as normal goes, and it was easy. And I breastfed him for 6 weeks. At 6 weeks I got mastitis. Mastitis is like an infection in the milk duct, and you can find ways of preventing it from happening, but even, you know, when you've done it a lot, it can happen, you can still get mastitis. But I got it in the first boob. I persevered through it. I was getting milk when I was pumping, blood, sorry, when I was pumping, and it was just awful. So I kept going and persevered. Then I got it in the other side. And with mastitis and the kind of infection it is, you get flu symptoms, or you can, if you get it really bad, get flu symptoms. Headaches, nauseous, hot and cold, you know, shivering 1 minute and burning up the next. And I just felt so awful. And all three of my sisters, me and my sisters, have had mastitis. Even if you don't breastfeed, you can end up with mastitis, you know, during, you know, the drying up period or whatever. So I gave up, and I felt really bad, and I totally regret that. So by the time I came to have Oliver, I was determined I was going to crack this breastfeeding malarkey. Absolutely determined. My mother-in-law had bought me an electric breast pump because I'd had handheld breast pumps in the past. I'll move on to that in a little while, you know, with more information on that. But I had an electric breast pump. I bought a shawl, and I was like, I'm going to do this. I am super prepared. I read loads of information. I've read loads of information about preventing mastitis and things that I can do to help myself, and preparing and stuff. And I had Oliver by emergency C-section. Now, generally when you have a C-section, they say that you're less likely to be able to breastfeed. Well, it turns out Oliver was my best for feeding. He was fantastic. So I had them first few days where he'd done the binging or something, you know, and he binged, and I was tired and it was hard, and, you know, on the C-section scar, it kind of puts pressure on your stomach a little bit, you know, with your muscles tense when they're feeding and stuff. But I could deal with it. It was fine. It wasn't, you know, ridiculously painful, and I persevered through it. And I remember kind of like a week in, maybe, I was only home a couple of days. I was in hospital for almost a week, and then a couple of days later I was at home, and I was just hurting, and I felt exhausted, and I was in pain from my C-section, and I was crying, and I just felt awful. And the one thing that saved me was that my sister had given me these nipple shields, the Medela ones. Now, I tried Advent nipple shields with Bradley. They were useless. I tried Tommy Tippy. I think Tommy Tippy do them. I tried another brand anyway, and they didn't work. Boots, they didn't work. They were just awful. And I think what it is the different ones, they're like thin, and then I'll show you what I mean, because I've got Macy in my arms. I'll show you what I mean. These ones by Medela, they're not even in here. Okay, so these ones by Medela, if you see, they're like kind of circular all the way around, and then the top bit's cut. Now, the other ones that I tried are kind of like, they're kind of like, there's not this circular part here. I don't know if that has something to do with it. I have no idea, but they were rubbish. And these saved me from quitting. I was this close to quitting. I was so sore, and it was hurting, and I just thought, this is awful. And I had, I was leaking blood from my nipples, like, because they were so sore, and I was going to quit. And I used these, and literally I had one feed with these on, and I had a blood blister on my nipple, and one feed with these on took the edge off it and allowed my nipple to start to repair itself. And by the next feed, I could feed him again without needing the shield. Like, they tell you don't use the shields because you can confuse baby. If you are at the point of feeling like you're gonna quit, just do it. You can go back to not using the nipple shield. You know, if it's going to save you from giving up, it's well worth giving it a go. And I even took them to hospital with me when I had Macy, just in case. And I didn't care if anyone was going to tell me that it was a silly thing to do, or that I shouldn't do it. By this point, I knew what I was doing, and I didn't need anyone to tell me otherwise. So, and I never ended up using them with Macy in the hospital, but I took them anyway. So these were fantastic. Would highly recommend them. Like I say, you don't have to use them for every feed, and They come in this honey case. You get 2, and just super useful. I didn't quit, and I made it through, and I used the shawl sometimes when I was out. This shawl that I've got is super cute. You can get loads of these. It's got like muslin squares on the end, and the top part's like a hoop, and this kind of holds it open. You put it over like this. You put it over your neck like this, and this hoop kind of stays open like that, so you can look down and see what you're doing, and you don't have to, you know, with muslin squares they can like slip down and stuff. So this was super useful. This was super useful because obviously, you know, there's a lot of controversy about, you know, we breastfeeding in public. Now, I have no problem in breastfeeding in public, and I'm totally pro breastfeeding in public. But I do understand and I do respect that perhaps some people feel a little bit awkward. Perhaps, you know, it's not a case they don't like breastfeeding, but sometimes some people feel a bit awkward. It just is, it is what it is, you know, and I totally respect that. And so in certain environments I would use this so I would feel more comfortable, and so I wouldn't make other people feel uncomfortable, because that's a whole nother topic in itself. So yeah, and I fed him really well, and I fed him right up before, just as I went back to work, and I found that working, it was too tricky, and I gave up just after a couple of weeks after I started work, because I was feeling really uncomfortable during work, and silly me wasn't thinking of taking the breast pump and expressing, which is what I'm going to do this time. But I saved a fortune as well breastfeeding, because obviously a can of milk is like £10 a can, and obviously breast milk's free. It's fantastic. I also found when I had Oliver that I was so thirsty. One other thing I'd recommend getting if you're going to breastfeed is a bottle of some description with water, because obviously when you're breastfeeding, you're sitting, you know, and I mean the great thing about breastfeeding is you've got the use of your hands. If you use like a boppy pillow or, you know, cushions to prop the baby up and stuff, you can still do what you're doing and breastfeed and use your hands, which is fantastic. So I could eat dinner with everybody else whilst feeding my son, and it's really useful. But I got super thirsty and I couldn't get enough water, so a bottle like that would be fantastic. You know, if you want to read a book while you're breastfeeding, you can do that. It's fine. It's so much easier, and there's no faffing around with bottles or anything like that. And so yeah, it's cheaper as well. Less stuff in your baby bag, because you haven't got to carry bottles. You can feed your baby whenever. It's not, you know, you don't have to think, you know, it's not really, I haven't got time to, you know, put milk into the bottle and time limits and all that kind of stuff. You can just get on with it, which I love. And on days out it's super handy as well, because like I say, it's less stuff for you to carry around. So fast forward then to Macy, and because I'd done it with Oliver, I was adamant that I was going to breastfeed Macy. There's no reason why I couldn't. I would just get on with it. Now Macy was planned C-section, so I was awake for Macy's C-section. Oliver's I was asleep for. I was just put to sleep because they had a cord prolapse. With Macy I was awake. I went into recovery, and not long after I started feeding her, and she's good latch and she fed really well. I expected to get a little bit sore, and I did. I was a little bit sore. And then it was only kind of like a couple of weeks in, I started thinking, okay, so after a couple of weeks usually the soreness goes away, so why is the soreness not going away? And obviously when you're in hospital and you leave, they check them all over and stuff, but one thing they don't check really is their mouth. Tongue tie. And I hadn't even come across tongue tie, and it now makes me wonder if Bradley perhaps had a tongue tie, because they can stretch them out over time. But I wondered if it was tongue tie. I was just looking online at different, you know, is there something, you know, is there something I am doing slightly wrong, you know, is she a bit different, is there something, I don't know, I had loads of thoughts going through my mind. So anyway, I looked it up, and it turns out Macy had a tongue tie. So basically, if I show you, that part of the mouth, her tongue, to the end, there's like a skin in the middle, isn't there? Macy's come right to the tip of her tongue almost, and so she had a tongue tie, and so I contacted the hospital doctors. In the NHS it can take a couple of weeks. Now if you're in pain feeding and you feel like crying and it's really sore, a couple of weeks can seem like forever. A relative of mine decided to go private and got it done privately. I think a friend, someone on Facebook, she also went private and sorted it out. But I thought, I'm going to persevere. You know, it's like 150, 60 pounds, something like that to get it done. I thought, no, I'm going to do this. And the worst thing is a tongue tie takes like 2 minutes, 2 seconds to do. It's ridiculous. So we established a tongue tie. I had a lady that I had, a breast lady as I called her. She was massive support. She was referred to me by my health visitor regarding breastfeeding. And what was surprising to me was the fact that after all of the midwives coming in, the health visitors coming and all that, I was the one that discovered she had a tongue tie. They didn't notice that until I pointed it out. So there could be lots of mums out there that are struggling, don't know why, could have a tongue tie. It's actually more common than I thought it was. So anyway, she was referred to the hospital. It took like 2 weeks after initially speaking to the health visitor or midwife. It took like 2 weeks for the to get an appointment, and then it was like a month in total or something. So we took her to the hospital, and literally I didn't even take her out of the pram. The doctor just opened her mouth and he was really good. He was like, snip. And then he said to me, oh, and she has a lip tie too. So the bit in the centre of your tongue here, I know that's kind of gross. That was also, you know, she didn't have a lot of movement in her tongue or her mouth. And that was causing some of the problem because she wasn't getting a good latch. And she was very sicky and windy, and we thought perhaps that was linked. So he snipped that as well. The tongue tie didn't bleed when he snipped on the bottom. The top part did bleed. And she cried just for a moment. But then she was fine. By the time we left the doctor's office, and we were only in there 5 minutes, she was fine. She was a little bit groggy that evening, a little bit grumpy, cowpole, but she was fine. And literally that first couple of feeds after having the tongue tie done, I mean, I fed her in the waiting room after, and it was just so good. I had blood all over my boob because obviously she just had it done, but literally by the time we left the hospital, the bleeding had stopped and she was fine. And from then on, she's fed really well. And I will say, the one thing that she's different with is the shawl. This shawl, she doesn't like it. And that goes again about children being different, because Oliver didn't mind it. If I put that on and try and feed her, she won't feed, she won't latch, she's not interested, she doesn't like it. So I don't really use that with Macy.